Okay, so today my outline of presentation will be on the definition of what is case study and what is case study method, and designing the case study, as well as conducting the case study and preparing the data collection, as well as the collect the data in fieldwork and so on. Okay. So definition of case study: it is a process or record of research in which detailed consideration is given to the development of a particular person, a group, or situation over a period of time. Okay, so it is a process and recording of to find out some things that is beyond the scope of quantitative research. Because quantitative research, you can, for example, if you do a survey, you will do a certain a survey on a certain about the population, for example. What is the population of Malaysia between the old and the young generation, for example? A lot of population in the world now is the old generation. Okay, a lot of countries like Japan, America, they have the old generation. The old population is more than the younger population because of the birth of rates and so on. So you want to find out more. Why is such a way? Why don't people get married, or why? Because in what do you call that, survey research, you only find the numbers, but you don't see you don't probe deeper into the reason. So qualitative research offer an opportunity for you to do that, especially on a case study. For example, you want to compare population between the case study in America and the case study in Japan. Okay, so your reasoning will be to find out why in America it happens such a way, and Japan why it happens such a way. So you probe further into the areas of reasoning and so on and so forth. Okay. Or, and number two is a particular instance of something used or analyzed in order to illustrate a thesis or principle. In your case, most of you are involved in a thesis, be it a master thesis or a PhD thesis. Okay, even if it's a short research 1 year for your coursework thesis. So the case study as a research strategy. Okay, a case study is used in many situations, including political policy or political science and public administration research, as well as community psychology and sociology. Okay, as well as for in management, for example, for project management students, you can study on organizational and management studies, as well as city regional for the planners. You can study on neighborhood, study about the crime in the neighborhood, or something like that. But public agencies, how public agencies work and how they are implementing of the strategies. And then to conduct of dissertation and thesis in social sciences, the academic discipline, as well as professional fields such as business, administrative, management science, social work, and of course in the built environment, even architecture use this method to find out something about building design and so on and so forth. Okay, so what is a case? When you talk about case study, what is a case? It can be anything. It can be any organization. It can be any process. It can be any person or people, a set of people. It can be any technology, any product, or any building. So any of this can be a case study, right? Okay. And then definition of case studies by, this is famous, quoted by Robert Cain, and I think everybody used Yin as the main, okay. So the research defines by Yin is that the case study research method is an empirical inquiry. What is empirical? Empirical is something that you study through experiencing it, through the actual data. Okay, it's not just guesswork. Okay, it is the actual data. Okay? Is gathered that investigate a contemporary phenomena. Okay, whatever phenomena that you want to study within its real life context, meaning it actually happened or is actually there. And then when the boundaries between phenomena and context is not clearly evident, what is the boundary between the actual phenomena and the context and how it happened, in which multiple sources of evidence are used. Okay, case study can be can mean a single case study or multiple case study, and then can include quantitative. Case study is a method, but it can include both. It can be a qualitative or it can be a quantitative evidence. And then it relies on multiple sources of evidence and benefits from the prior development of theoretical proposition. It is based on a certain theory or theoretical framework in which you gather evidence to support those theories or otherwise. Okay, so the collective case study is the number of cases in order for you to inquire into a particular phenomena. I will explain further later for you to understand clearly. So this is a basic understanding of what the phenomena is. Okay, so for example here, you study a phenomena. Okay, a phenomena can be a building or a earthquake incident, for example. So the context is, for example, a context can be a geography, location. It can be a certain period of time. It can be, so you define the context. For example, I want to study high-rise buildings. Okay, I want to study on the safety of high-rise building or the thermal comfort of high-rise building. So the context can be high-rise building in Malaysia. Okay, so high-rise building, the context can also be limited to 40-story. Okay, so the unit of analysis is what do I study on the safe thermal comfort? For example, I study the daylighting, or or if thermal comfort, I want to measure the temperature. I want to measure the air movement in the building itself. So you determine the scope of the phenomena and the scope of the context that you want to do research on. This will all comes from your research questions or your problem statement. You start with research questions and the problem statement, and then you will define this phenomena itself and the context. Okay, so it's very important to identify the edge of what the phenomena is all about, as well as the boundary of the context. If not, you can be too open-ended, in which for PhD, for example, you cannot finish in 3 years, or it will be too complex for you to study. Okay. And then design research. Okay, so the design is the logical sequence that connects the empirical, okay, empirical meaning the verifiable by observation or experience data, to the study initial research questions and to its conclusion. So actually, to put it very simple, research is that you want to find here, you want to get from here, which is your research questions. You want to find out certain area of questions, or how to solve certain problems, and then to get to the set of conclusion, which is there. Okay, you want to get from here to there. Okay, so you want to get from answering questions to the set of conclusion answering those questions, and then in between is the collection analysis of your data. Okay, that is simply putting what research is all about. Okay, so for example, you design the research methodology and prepare the question, the how to execute the research design, and then you can have one case study or two case study. So the analysis of both case studies should be the same method of analysis, and then you analyze the finding over the case and present the results. So another way of thinking about the research is that it is a blueprint for your research dealing with at least 4 problems. So what questions to study? What do you want to find out actually? Okay, this is students sometimes can be confused because they want to find out too many things under the sun. Okay, that they want to solve all the problems about project management, for example, or all the problems regarding building design, for example. It's too big. Remember, the time of your study is very limited. Some of you, for your coursework, is only 1 year or less. And then for PhD, it's only 3 years. You cannot solve all the problems with the sun. You can only do a very small scope of research. It is just a starting point. Later in your career, you will continue to do research to solve many other problems related to the topic. Okay, so what data are relevant to your research? what data to collect, and how to analyze the results. So methodology is actually a method is equal to method plus design. What do I mean by this? Method is the actual method. For example, you want to do survey method, you want to do experimental method. Okay? The design is how you execute those methods. You have to design, you have to devise on how you actually collect the data and how you analyze them. What software to use, or for case study or qualitative, how do you derive to the results? Okay, so remember this methodology is method plus the design. So when you do your methodology chapter, be clear on this. Some people, when they do the methodology, they know what they did, but in writing your thesis, it can be very obscure to the readers. You know, readers are still asking, how did you, you know, the last 2 days I went through as internal examiner for the PhD thesis. It's quite a good thesis, okay, awarded 2 minor correction, but somehow when I read the methodology chapter, how did that person do this? What is the model? What is the measurement of the model that they designed? What is the simulation technique? What is the why did the simulation software was selected? They didn't answer. He didn't answer that question. But later, when I read the analysis chapter, oh, only he gave the answer. By right, everything should be clear in the methodology chapter. You should define everything in the methodology chapter and why you select certain method and why you use how to analyze them. All should be in the methodology chapter. Okay. So for the components of research design, okay, the 5 components. This is very important for case study. So what are the studies question, research question? Is proposition. We have a theory that support it. You have a hypothesis. For example, my PhD thesis was long way back in 1990. So at the time, Malaysia adopt a lot of high-rise in the city center in KL, for example. A lot of this high-rise condominium was built, and then I wanted to know in terms of fire safety, is it very safe? So my hypothesis is that perhaps high-rise building would pose a lot, there's a bit unsafe in terms of fire. Okay, that's my hypothesis. My hunch, my feeling, my gut feeling about it. Okay, so when I did the research, I found that it's very safe because they follow a certain guidelines, bylaws that ensure that the people who stay in the high-rise building are basically safe from fire. Okay, that was my findings. Okay, so it's unit of analysis. What is unit of analysis can be a series of measurement in terms of, for example, in my case, when I want to study the fire safety, I have to look at the bylaw that governs the building design. I can look at the planning, the site planning, the internal planning, the number of staircase, and so on and so forth. Those are the number or units of analysis. And then the logical thinking, linking the data to the hypothesis. Okay, must be a logic, the trail of thoughts or relationship between the question, the hypothesis, and the data collection. And then the criteria for interpreting the findings. Okay. So basically, this diagram shows how you relate the whole process of research in the case study method. You develop the theory. Okay, what theory? For example, the theory on tsunami back in 2004, is it tsunami? Okay, so and then select case study. So perhaps you do the case study of a city where it occurs. Okay, and then sometimes for one case study, actually, it's more to dwell further into something, a phenomenon. For example, you want to case study only on the Indonesian case for the tsunami. So it's only one case study, but the phenomena have to be designed, the strategy or the design collection have to be a very deep probe into the matter. because you're studying only one case. So you have to dwell deeper into the case study to study all the aspects of the tsunami in Indonesia, for example. Okay. But if you compare Indonesian phenomena with the other countries, for example, in Thailand, for example, in Sri Lanka, how the same tsunami affect those countries, then you can be a little bit shallower on the probe. Because you study in terms of 3 case studies, you can only find like three units of measurement for the 3 types of the same phenomena, but in 3 different countries. Okay, so case study 1, case study 2, and the other case studies. So you have to probe very deeply into one of the case study and write individual case report, and then you draw the similarity and the modified theory between the 3 case studies and develop the policy to implicate the implications of all the 3 case study and write the cross case report of the 3 and conclude your research. So another diagram to show the thing is about, okay, you base on your research on the existing theory, and then you come out with the research question, thematize the study, what theme are you going to study on the area of field of your study, and then case selection, okay? So the case study protocol, what are the similarities of the different cases that you want to engage on in, and then do a pilot study if it's possible, and then data collection for all the 3 case or more, okay? And then the data analysis for the case study that you did, cross-case comparison of the case studies and findings and conclusion. Okay, so for case study, the theory development as part of design phase is essential. So what is your theoretical framework, okay, of the study, okay? And then the structure that can hold or support a theory of your research, okay? So the theoretical framework introduce and describe the theory that explain why the research problem under study exists. For example, if you talk about theoretical framework, I have to study the theory of fire, okay? How it evolves and what does building a fire safety is governed by. So, for example, the theory of fire in terms of the structural spread of fire, okay, compartmentation, and so on and so forth. Those are the theoretical framework that I have to work with. Okay, if you look at the diagram here, you can see here, for example, you want to study air safety violation. How is air safety being violated? Okay, so that is the dependent variable. Okay, and you have your independent variable. For example, how does the communication amongst cockpit members with the people on the ground? Okay, and the communication between ground control and cockpit, decentralization of the safety on board, and training of cockpit crew, and for example, so on and so forth. Okay, so these are the independent variable to see how air safety violation is implemented, or is it being violated. Okay, so these are the theoretical framework that can help you to find to get the answers that you want to research on. Excuse me. Okay, I just want to share with you a very interesting incident. Okay, this may not be related to the research, but in Korea, funny, okay, it's not funny, it's serious, but in Korea in the 1980s, there was a lot of, in 70s, 80s, I think in the early parts, there was a lot of air flight disaster. A lot of airlines in Korea had incidents and killed people because of the airline crash. And they discover, they do a research on that. Why does it happen? And they find out that in Korean language, when you are a junior, you will be very polite. Like in Malaysia, we can call an elder person, with like aunt or uncle or a brother. In English language, no, you call the queen you. You say I. It's I and you. No matter who you speak with. In the Malay language or in the Korean language, you are polite with the elder people. Let's say, for example, Korean, you call people older than you, a male, you call oppa, okay? Like abang in Malaysia, or in Indonesia, perhaps the same, okay, mas, and so forth. So in the Korean language, when there's a junior pilot and a senior pilot, they still, that means they're being polite. When there's a serious information regarding a faulty thing, or some, for example, they will politely mention it to the senior pilot, and the senior pilot may not understand that it's a very serious situation because of the politeness of the language. So the cockpit language was in the old days in a Korean language. So because of the language problem and the seriousness of the situation is not come across to the main pilot, it caused accidents to happen. So after they researched that, they discovered that because of the language, they changed to all the cockpit language in Korea to change to the English. So whenever pilot instructs something, is in the English language. You see, it's interesting, isn't it? To find out something as trivial as the language and the respect of the language, too polite that it can cause that serious problem in the cockpit when you need to be stern and you need to be very, serious about things. So I just find out it from reading, and it's quite interesting to share. Okay, so again, I think you understand now about the theoretical framework. Okay, so the case study research is mainly to answer more or one or more questions and begin with how or why. How did this happen? How did the tsunami happen, for example? How did the crash of the market, okay, happen, and so on and so forth? And why did it happen? Okay, so for example, in the building scenario, how efficient is the building thermal comfort? And why is the building not efficient in thermal comfort? Okay, so those are the two main questions for case study research: how and why. So let us take a look. Perhaps some of you may have different methodology that you employ in your PhD or master. For example, experiment. Experiment will ask the same question, how and why, and requires control over the behavior of events. Yes, you control your instrumentation, you control everything. So yes, you do control. And then focus on contemporary event. Yes, because experiment usually you measure now. Okay, so you do the experiment now to answer the current question. Survey, for example, can be so many questions. It can be who, what, where, how many, how much, and then can you control the behavior events? No, because it relies on your respondents. Respondents will answer questions according to their understanding of the subject or according to their experience, okay? And it's also a contemporary event. For example, archival analysis, basically on historical related also to history. Okay, you study about archive and what happened that is archived in the library or what, who, what, where, how many, and can you control? No. And then it can be the event that is current, or it can be old event that happens before. History, of course, also how and why, but you cannot control also the behavior of the respondents, and it will be in the old, it's not the current situation. So for case study, it also answers the question of how and why, and you also cannot control the behavior of events, because when you go to the field and you measure it, or not measure, you go to the field and you do direct observation. Sometimes the direct observation can lead you to things that you have to probe further, okay, to see further why that happens, and so on and so forth. For example, you do a study of building in terms of the thermal comfort, you find that some area is very hot, even though in spite of the aircon, you still have to use fans in the building. So you have to study further. Why does it happen? Why is it hot in that certain zone? Okay, so you cannot you cannot control the behavior event. You have to probe deeper and deeper to get your answers. Okay, and of course, it's also focused on the contemporary event. So the essence of case study, the central tendency among all type of case studies is that try to eliminate a decision or a set of decisions, why they were taken, how they were implemented, and what is the result. Okay, so this one is similar to repeat what Yin has said. So type of case study, you have your single case study design or multiple case study design. Okay, so for example here, you just study one phenomena. For For example, just now I show you example, a phenomena of like Palu, for example, the earthquake in Palu, and then why the tsunami and so on, so on and so forth. And you study the context of Palu and within a certain frame, and then you study deeper on how, on the survivors or whatever. Okay, so this is a very deep probe into that subject matter because you only have one case study, and if you want to study for a PhD on a single case study, it will have to be very, very very in-depth kind of study. The phenomena has to be a very, very what do you call it, wide scope, and even the context must be very the scope is very wide for that single case study. But if you have various case study, you can have for example, just now I give an example, my case, I study between one is UK and the Malaysian case study. And of course, in the Malaysian scenario, I have a few buildings, 4 buildings. In UK, only 3 buildings. But the unit of analysis is one, the bylaw or the regulations. Number 2, the building site planning and the building design, internal planning, number of staircase, number of all the other active firefighting and so on and so forth. Okay, so you can also study case study, but different phenomena. Okay, you want to study, for example, how do I say this? For example, you want to study a company that employ construction company that use sustainable approach, for example. Okay, so you want to study how many you refine yourself to only class A contractor, for example. Okay, class A contractor who adopt the sustainable approach. Okay, so you can study the context of the study and the phenomenon. Okay, so then you can have a various variation to your studies according to what you want to find out. You can have different units of analysis. Okay, a number of unit of analysis. Okay, so can you switch off your mic first? I can hear the background noise. Veronica, switch off your phone, your sound, your mic. Okay, please. Thank you. Veronica, I can hear you talking. Please switch off your mic, your microphone. Okay, so comparative case study involves the analysis and synthesis of similarities, differences, patterns of 2 or more cases that share a common focus or goal. Okay, so for example, building, you can use a similar typology building. You cannot study a museum, and then you study an art gallery, and then you study an office. How can you come to the same conclusion to compare the notes? There's 3 types of building, because office have different scenarios, different issues. Museum have different issues. Art gallery have different issues. So you must have a common denominator of what you want to study. Okay, so you cannot study orange and apple. Okay, if you want to have a multiple case study, it should be orange and orange or apple with apple. Okay, for example, you want to study on the company policy on sustainability. You cannot study class A and you study class C. You try to have, if you have to study class A contractor, you study the same similar type of case studies. Okay, so that your analysis can be compared to the same. For example, just now I told you I study about the UK scenario and Malaysian scenario. I study all the same features. Let's say 6 unit of analysis, I study the same part, unless that country does not have that things, for example, that by law certain things. But in my case, I was lucky, both countries, because Malaysia also adopt some of the UK bylaws, so everything was the same units of study area. Okay, so please bear in mind, when you do case study, compare the similar type of theoretical framework for the different cases. And then to be able to do this well, the specific features of each case, each case should be described in depth at the beginning of the study. Okay, build up your framework towards these specific features that you want to study in the chapter 2, in your theory chapter. The rationale for selecting the specific cases is directly linked to the key evaluation questions. For example, later you want to analyze it, so you must specify the specific cases in relation to your theory, as well as later how you analyze them. Okay, and an understanding of each case is important in establishing the foundation for the analytical framework that for your cross-case comparison. Okay, for example, in my case, I can discuss on the requirement of dead end for my buildings in UK and dead end for my building in Malaysia. Okay, so Malaysia, for example, the dead end is 50 meters, for UK 10 meters. Why is that so? Okay, because Malaysia, a lot of them are natural ventilation, for example. So I can cross comparison the case because I already set the framework, and then how to analyze them is already defined when I first started to do my research. So, but sometimes for case study method, you can use both. You can use comparative case study to adopt both qualitative and quantitative data. For example, one student did a study of office building in terms of the thermal comfort. So she studied the direct observation, and she also do the measurement in terms of taking measurement in the building and so on. Okay, so you can combine both qualitative as well as quantitative data. So and then another highlight by Yin is that there are many critical cases of you to study. You can study critical cases. For example, what is critical at this current scenario? For example, in Malaysia, the cases of building under construction, for example, the critical case is why accident happened in the construction site. Okay, so it's critical for you to solve. For example, recently we had one of the what do you call it, IBS section of walls to the highway fell down on the car. So that is very critical to study, for example. So urgent need to study, so that it become critical cases to study, or something unique or extreme that can capture your interest to study. Representative, this is a sort of to represent a certain scenario, to represent the construction industry, to represent the nation or something, or revelatory, want to reveal something new. Or longitudinal cases. Longitudinal cases meaning you study something over a period of time to get the idea. Maybe why does polio return in Malaysia or something like that. Okay. Okay, so actually in terms of the way the research is conducted can fall into three types, which is exploratory, to explore something new. Okay, so for example here, an investigation into the reason of the global financial and economic crisis in 2008. So you explore it. You're exploring something, the territory of why this happened, you want to explore something. Okay, and the second one is descriptive. You want to describe something. Okay, so for example here, impact of increasing levels of multiculturalism on marketing practice, a case study of McDonald's Indonesia. Okay, so this is to describe, okay, the increased level of multiculturalism or marketing practice in McDonald's franchise, in particular in Indonesia. Okay, and then you want to explain something. You want to explain the reason why behind, more of a why. So why things happen in such a way, the cause and effect relationship. For example, the same area, the first one you study on the global financial economic crisis in 2008 per se. You explore the incident in 2008. But for explanatory, you want to explain the cause. You study an investigation into the reason of the global financial and economic crisis of 2008 to 2010. Okay, so this one to explain, that one to explore on how it happens, but the explanatory more of why it happens. So the researcher must determine whether to study the cases which are unique in some ways, or cases which are considered typical, and may also select the cases to present a variety of geographic region, for example, a variety of size parameters and other parameters. So a useful step in the selection process is repeatedly refer back to the purpose of the study. Why are you doing that study? Okay, what do you want to find out? What are your research questions? Okay, so it goes back to that. So the scope of your study will be determined by your question in the first place. Okay, so how to determine the data gathering analysis technique. For example, the researcher determines in advance what evidence you want to gather and what analysis technique to use with the data to answer your research question. It's always tied up. Please bear in mind, students, when you do your final chapter, your conclusion chapter, you must always answer back your objectives. Okay, remember I told you 2 days ago, the student did not focus on that. He only focused in relation to hypothesis, which is wrong. In your final chapter, write this down, all the PhD students. In your final chapter, you must always relate to your objectives. So how did you answer objective 1? You tend to synthesize the results from the actual data, the result from you can connect it to your theory, okay, and then explain your findings based on the theory and how your data shows. So objective 1, objective 2, objective 3 must be answered in the concluding chapter, okay, because we want to see how you achieve your objectives. If your final chapter does not showcase that you achieve your objective, something is wrong with your thesis and you may have a major correction. Okay, so to avoid any major correction, you must ensure that your final chapter is written to show that you have answered all the 3 or 4 objectives, whatever it is. Okay, so tools to collect the data can be surveys, interviews, documentation review, observation. Surveys would be more on quantitative, but for qualitative, mainly is interviews and the documentation review. For example, you visit the building, you do the direct observation, and you document all your findings from archive or whatever, okay? And even the collection of physical artifacts, okay? For certain areas, you collect the physical artifacts, okay? And then throughout the design phase, researchers must ensure that the study is well constructed to ensure the validity is constructed, okay? Internal, external validity, the reliability, as well as use the correct measures for the concept that you study. So what about the validities? Okay, this is about how you, perhaps, I think some other lecturers will focus more on this validity in later lectures. I'm not sure about that. I just include it to show that you must have your validity in check. How valid is your data? And you cross it, okay? Cross-examine the validity. That's why some research would go for direct observation and they compare it to the measurement so that you can validate your data of your observation with the measurements. For example, here, sometimes when you interview the occupants, you ask them how comfortable are they in the building. They would say, oh, it's very comfortable. And then, or otherwise, they say, oh, I'm not comfortable. I have to use the fan to be comfortable. And then when you do the measurement, it shows that the temperature is correct. So why are they not feeling comfortable? Perhaps there's not enough air movement in the area. So that is why you cross-check the validity of your data in terms of 2 methods, okay? This is mainly for PhD. For masters by coursework, don't be too worried about the cross-validity, because for masters, especially for coursework research, we are not expecting you to validate all this research because it's only 1 year, less than 1 year, it's only 9 months research. So these are more concerning the PhD research, okay? You have the internal validity, okay? And then establishing the causal relationship, and it's mainly concerned for explanatory. When you explain something, you must know how do you relate the pattern to match the pattern of different cases, and so on and so forth. And external validity is use theory in a single case, or some things like how to relate to the other research, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the write-up on the validity. Okay, so internal validity is more important for the explanatory research or causal, because you want to find out why this caused a certain phenomenon. For example, just now, why accident involving some aeroplane, okay, 737, for example. And I saw this document, for example, what is happening because some of the instrument to say that on what height the flight is sometimes faulty, something like that. Okay, so but a lot of the pilots are aware of this, so they will press towards their manual control on the height of the aeroplane. But there's one incident involving the Turkish airline where it sort of crashed. But luckily, they crashed at a lower area, so not many, a lot of people survived from the crash. And the documentary shows that because the pilot, between the three people in the cockpit, was busy talking about giving announcement to the people in the flight that they missed the miscalculation of the flight automatic reading, so they missed the height of the flight before they land. So something like that. Okay. So you want to know the reason why this happened. And then external validity reflects whether or not findings are generalizable with other cases before or other procedures that happened before, and something like that. Cross-examination with other literatures and external apart from your study itself. Okay, so reliability is referring to the stability, accuracy, and precision of your measurement, how you derive to a conclusion. For example, when you interview people, their state of mind, what are their opinions. Sometimes you look at the character of the people you interview, the people who always blame people, and sometimes you must take their word at face value. You cannot really accept that that is the conclusion to the interview, and so on and so forth. You must always look at other expert opinion, okay, to cross examine whether this person opinions can be validated or not with other people. Okay, so Yin identify 6 primary sources of evidence for case study. You have can be more or less. Okay, so the 6 sources relying on documentation. You document whatever you do, be it you go to interview or you direct observation about the pattern of circulation. For example, you want to study about the circulation of people, you know, in the LRT or something like that. So you document it from certain time to certain time. How many people use the toilet? How many people use the whatever? So you document everything. Okay. Archival records, you retrieve sources from archive, and then you do interviews. Interviews can be so many types of interviews. I think in Dr. Farah's slide, she already mentioned about the type of interviews. It can be open-ended interviews. Usually for you to be more consistent, you should have structured interviews, because you have, let's say, 5 expert opinion. You want to have the same findings from each interviewee. So you must have the structure. You want to ask A, B, C, D, E, F, G, for example. For the 5 correspondent, you want to ask the same question. If you have open kind of questions, interview method, then you get different things from different people. So how can you cross analyze the data that you get from them? So it must be structured interview. You ask almost the same questions, but if they give something out of the ordinary, then you can also ask the other people on this aspect. Okay, so direct observation, especially for architecture, you only observe the design and also the how the building is constructed, and so on and so forth. And then participant observation as well as physical artifacts. So three principles of data collection for case studies are: use multiple source of data. You cannot rely on one thing. Maybe you ask expert opinion. You also go to observe yourself. You rely on there must be more than one source to validate, because case study research, that's why a lot of people are against case study research. They say that it is restricted to certain cases where you cannot generalize the findings. But a lot of arguments now that case study is a valid method because of the stringent way of how this case study research is being conducted, to make sure that the validity is there. Okay. So create a case study database, meaning that you must have your database for your findings, maintain the chain of events, why this lead to this, and certain how you get the expert opinions. Maybe they go beyond what you asked, then they brought up something that's interesting that you have not think about. So you can discover and probe further into that area where you have not thought of, and try to ask the other opinions on this as well, and go to study more on this aspect. So it's like the rolling ball effect. Okay, you study about certain things and it keep the ball rolling, opening to more venues of ideas that you have not thought in your research to start off. Okay. So the rationale for using multiple sources of data is you can triangulate the findings, the reliability of the data, and the process of gathering. So in the context of data collection, triangulation serves to corroborate the data gathered from other sources. This should be taken into consideration prior to the use of this technique. Okay. So how do you collect data in the field? The researcher must collect and store multiple sources of evidence comprehensively and systematically. Okay, and for example, I did 7 case studies, and during my time, 1990, we did not use AutoCAD yet. It was still in early stage. And then it was a very hard time for me, because when I come back to Malaysia, I got all the drawings from the office, the architect office, and AO set of drawings. I had to bring all this to UK, back to UK, and then I had to hire my architecture junior to draw back to fit into A4. Can you imagine that? There was no software yet, where the drawings are all in soft copy. Everything was in hard copy. So I had to keep all the drawings for the building and then draw it back. So for case study research, in my case, descriptive research, descriptive thesis, the writing itself took me 9 months just to draw each building, 7 buildings, to redraw all the plans, the sections, the elevations, and then how lucky you are in this era where you have everything in soft copy. Okay? So those are my challenges doing research in the 90s. Okay, so the research must collect and store the multiple sources and systematically put in your files. Your file links must be very systematically putting all the whatever information that you have from your interviews, from your observations, and so on and so forth. Okay, so researchers carefully observe the object of the case study and identify causal factors associated with the observed phenomena. Renegotiation of arrangement of the object of the study or addition of questions. I think that one you can also look at. I think it's not important, but you can look later when you do the research. Okay, so the researcher examined raw data using many interpretation in order to find linkage between the research object and the outcomes of the research. So as I mentioned just now, you have to look at various sources of data to cross triangulation in terms of your findings. Okay, for example, in my case, I have to triangulate between the actual law, and then how the architect approached the design, and then the interpretation of the firefighting department, where they were the one who interpret the bylaw in terms of understanding it and apply when they give approval to the architects and so on and so forth. I have to look at all these factors. How at the end the building is the outcome, which is the building. Okay. For example, one of my case study building was the first condominium in Malaysia. It have two staircase, but the staircase is in the core. It's just one is in direction, one is this direction, but it is at the central core. So to me, that building posed the most danger, because when the fire occurs in the central core will be filled with smoke and so on. So they have to get to the same core that is too close together to escape. So that is the most building that I think posed a lot of danger because of that. And that was because the fire brigade interpreted at first the bylaw was just introduced, so they couldn't understand that the angle of the staircase must be further at 45 degrees from each other and so on and so forth. So that is all that you need to integrate in terms of understanding why this thing leads to another and the connectivity between one data that leads to the other. Okay. So throughout the evaluation analysis process, the researcher remains open to new opportunities and insight. The case study method, with its use of multiple data collection method analysis technique, provide researchers with opportunities to aggregate data, as mentioned in great length just now. So exemplary case studies will deliberately sort the data in many different ways to expose or create new insights, and deliberately look for conflicting data to disconfirm the analysis. For example, how do you probe into something and discover new things and expose new insights to a phenomena? Okay, for example, the phenomena of why dropout among school children, for example. You want to probe into why it happens. So you study the school, you study the background of the parents, you study the family background. So sometimes it can lead to something that is quite new insights into the problem. Okay, so case study method can help in that, where quantitative will only look at how many delinquents are there, how many people drop out of school, but they cannot go further into why it happens. But qualitative research can go further to start to understand why this happened. Why does family let their children drop out from school, for example? Okay, so that's the beauty about qualitative research. You can probe into it deeper into the problems. So researchers categorize, tabulate, and combine data to address the initial proposition and so on and so forth. I think there is other lectures on how to analyze data. So this one is just an added part where I'm just supposed to give you how to conduct and not how to analyze. The analysis of the data will be made by other speakers later on, okay, other lecturers. But I'm just giving you a brief outline. So case study research is flexible, but when changes are made, they are documented systematically. Maintaining the relationship between the issue and evidence is mandatory. Okay, you must maintain the evidence between the relationship of the issue and why it happened in such a certain way. Okay, so the researcher may enter some data into a database and physically store other data, but the researcher documents, classifies, cross-reference all the data and sort out an examination of over the course of the research. So because case study research generate a large amount of data and multiple sources, systematic, you must be systematic in organizing your data so that some of the data might not be lost because of you have interviewed someone and you forgot to put the transcript of the interview, and sometimes it's lost and so on and so forth. So it relies a lot of your documentation of the data is critical for case study. Because like unlike survey, you will just get all the survey question answers and then you analyze in the software. But this one, every little things might be very important towards your findings. So you have to archive it. You have to organize it very well, the multiple sources of data. So anyway, the participant can describe their life phenomenon experience can be used together. This one for phenomenological study or all. So according to Einstein, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I would use the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. because asking the right question is more critical in getting the right answers. Okay, so I think a lot of the students sometimes are confused. What actually do you want to find out from your research? Especially, I see that the scope that you want to study sometimes is too wide that cannot be solved in three years. Okay, so you struggle because of the wrong question that you ask. You want to answer too many questions that cannot be done in the time frame that you embark on your research. Okay, so I think that's all from me.